Hello everyone and welcome to assignment 4, the research report. This assignment is the one in which you must get 40% or more in order to pass the course. The assessment is 55% of your course mark. I'm going to step through this assignment in the order in which it's written. First of all, the title. Ensure you choose your title carefully, making sure it reflects the contents of your report. Often it's easiest to choose your title last and ensure that it summarises the entire contents of your report. Secondly is the abstract. This should be clearly written as a summary of the entire report and includes the report's aims and objectives, main findings, results and the learning. Sometimes you may include key recommendations. The abstract will never be longer than 350 words, as that is the maximum length allowable in business databases. An abstract is not the same as an introduction, so see the introduction section following. And the purpose of this is to allow anyone reading your work to gain a quick overview. Keywords should appear at the end. The next section is the introduction. In this section you introduce your report, topic and context. Include things such as an explanation of the topic area, the problem or the issues being reported, any specific objectives you have, the question addressed in the report, the limitation and assumptions that you're making before you start out on this piece of research, and also you preview the report chapters to come. In this section you will also clearly state what you've set out to investigate. Your findings should flow from this question and aims. Next is the literature review. Your literature should contain relevant academic information with sources referenced in APA 7th edition. It should generate useful lines of inquiry. You should be using valid information that's entirely focused on your research question and should summarise the key elements of the literature that you've consulted during the researching and writing up of your report. The next section is methodology. In here we're wanting to see that you've utilised an appropriate method, that you've given a precise description of the methodology and methods employed in carrying out your investigation. We're wanting to be able to assess the quality of your method in relation to both professional practice and the objectives of your study. The other thing we're wanting to see is that subsequent researchers should be able to understand exactly how and why you set up the study in the way that you did. This is very important if anybody is going to replicate your work later. The next section is findings. Here we're looking to see that you've defined your major topics, that we can start to see the bones of your literature review showing in your findings and start to anticipate how that will connect in your discussion chapter. This should all be in your own language, not all quotes, and it should provide analysis, interpretation and clustering of the data you've collected, not just be a list of he said, she said, they said. It's really important that you present your findings in the most appropriate way. Individual reports will vary a lot, but in general the researcher is the best one to determine how you take analysis and interpretation because you're closest to the data. You've got to use credible sources, you need clear evidence that helps you state your case, and you need to present that information in a logical, systematic manner and divide the material with appropriate headings to ease the reader's understanding. Use illustrations and diagrams where appropriate to make it easy for the reader. Then considering the discussion section, this is where you pull elements of your literature review and your findings together and discuss what it means. In the findings section you are reporting on facts. In the discussion section you are applying meaning. You'll be developing main themes and issues. There may be personal analysis and observations included. You analyse and interpret what you've found and present your stance in a way that will then lead the reader to understand your conclusions. You have to present this analysis in a logical, systematic way and divide, again, with appropriate headings to aid the reader's understanding. Lastly is the conclusion, and the one rule of thumb here is that if it hasn't appeared in your discussion, it cannot appear in your conclusions. There should be no surprises in your conclusions, and effectively your conclusions chapter is a summary of the discussion. Conclusions should be grounded in the present and presented as a written chapter so that the major conclusions come first, and also it should clearly answer the research question. Well, the next part of the conclusions chapter is the limitations element. This section contains any substantive issues that prevented you from completely answering your research question. These should be tackled in order of importance and again not contain any new information. Now, the limitation that go into your conclusions chapter are not all the "oh no, poor me, I'm just a junior researcher" stuff. This is substantive limitations that prevented you from answering your research question. Lastly then, in the conclusions section, is future research. This is the advice that you would give a future researcher on how to avoid falling into the substantive issue traps that you fell into when you undertook your research, or anything that you would do differently next time. Then we have the bibliography in APA 7th edition with live link DOIs or URLs for anything that's been accessed electronically. And lastly, any supporting information. This is appendices, and they might contain material that is complex or too detailed, which may distract readers from the main theme. It is stuff that is nice to have rather than have to have. If there are graphs or other kinds of diagrams that would be better in your findings, leave them in your findings. If there are graphs that don't add any value to your findings, you could keep them close by, but as nice to have in an appendix. You also may want to consider a blank of your informed consent form, but you do not need to include your completed REA.